All right, so I have not been doing video blogs or vlogs, whatever you call them, quite some time. Been delinquent, been in a new um, location, commercial locations. We at Sustainable Success Strength Training have been up to over 50 sessions a week. I've got some help with some other trainers I'm very grateful for, but nevertheless overwhelmed, and this has sort of fallen by the wayside. So today I had an idea. I've had some ideas for things I want to talk about for a while now, and hopefully we'll get to. But today, one of my potential new clients, someone who's coming in for the free initial sessions that I give, has decided to commit to a 20 session package. And the question that this individual asked was what he could expect in terms of results in 10 weeks. He mentioned that in the past, one of the reasons he hadn't stuck to programs was his perceived lack of results. So it's a tough question, to be honest, and it sounds like I'm being a politician, but the answer tends to be it depends. But even before going there, I wanted to sort of clarify the question itself, because progress or results can be measured in many different ways. So one of them is, are we talking about how much weight you're lifting when you're doing the exercise? Are you increasing the amount of weight that you're using? Some people would equate that with being stronger, but that's not necessarily the case. Although most people don't think of it that way, but there's also improvements in form, because even though you could use the same weight with better form, that's still a positive result, but it's harder to measure. The other thing is actual muscle mass gained. So that's another thing you could measure, and I'm going to come back to that. This particular individual is engaged in a specific sport. So I talked about whether or not results for him would be specific improvements in the sport that he does. And then I talked about fat loss and whether that was one of the results, because of course, that is yet another result that people often associate and look for when they're engaged in an exercise, or in this case, strength training program. And I pointed out, there's different results for all of them. So at first I said, I'm going to do a blog post, and I started to type, and I thought, this is going to be a long article, and it's going to be easier, although there may be some rambling because you can't edit a video, to answer it sort of verbally. And of course, I can add it to my YouTube channel. So I asked the questions I said, and so the person answered that they have multiple goals. One of them is fat loss. And so I'll try to tackle some of these. He says he's speaking to his dietitian and an extra weight or two to discuss weight loss. He'd like to drop about 10 pounds. So first of all, exercise does contribute to, and he mentioned weight loss, but we should always, in my opinion, make the distinction between fat loss and weight loss, or even better, body composition, because you could theoretically gain 10 pounds of muscle, lose 10 pounds of fat, and weigh exactly the same, but you would look dramatically different. So first of all, exercise per se does not burn much in the way of calories. And the idea of losing fat as a result of burning extra calories in the gym is, as one person puts it, I'll attribute it, Drew Bay talks about, like trying to empty a swimming pool with a coffee cup in the rain. It really is kind of a losing proposition. If you did exercise enough to burn significant amount of calories, you would probably also raise your appetite. However, that's not to say that exercise does not contribute to fat loss, although it's very secondary to, first of all, creating a caloric deficit. I'll get into a bit more details as to what that actually needs to look like as well. And based on my opinion, he refers to a dietitian, and certainly I am not a registered dietitian, so I will give some opinions, which I think are basically sound. But anyways, one of the ways that exercise, and particularly strength training, does contribute to weight loss is because it does tend to empty out glycogen stores in your muscle and in your liver. So glycogen, your body stores energy in two different ways. First of all, glycogen is basically energy that is stored in your muscles and a small amount in your liver. But once those are full, then your body stores energy in the way of excess body fat. And it goes in that order. And of course, it goes in the opposite order when you are using up energy. Is first your body goes to glycogen stores first, and then to fat stores. So what exercise can contribute, particularly high intensity exercise, whether it's high intensity interval training, like on a Carol bike, or if you're doing proper strength training where you're exercising to failure, is it helps to empty out the glycogen stores, which means the meals that you're likely to eat shortly after that are more likely to replenish your glycogen stores, which in the absence of, if the glycogen stores are full, it tends to go to fat more. And also by emptying and refilling glycogen stores on a regular basis, you are apparently improving your resistance to having insulin, problems dealing with insulin, things like that. And it improves you metabolically, metabolism being how we work with energy. So it does that way. So caloric deficit, at the end of the day, people say calories in, calories out is an oversimplification. I agree with that, but it still has to be a caloric deficit. But how you achieve that caloric deficit can make a big difference. First of all, you want to make sure that you're getting adequate protein. Depending who you talk to and different guidelines that are published, how much protein you have or need is significantly more or less. I'm going to quote Stuart. This nice thing about Stuart from, I think it's Stuart Wright from McGill University. I feel like I'm getting the name wrong, so I'll have to clarify that in the notes. But he talks about getting, close to 100 grams or so 1 gram of protein for every gram of your desired body weight. And even maybe a little bit more than that, because that not only will encourage to make sure that the fat or the weight you lose is from fat stores and not from your lean body tissue, but it also will help you to put on muscle. Beyond a certain amount of protein, more will not help, but below, if you're getting not enough protein, that definitely is detrimental to your health. So you want to make sure you're getting adequate protein. So for, this person here is a person that is looking to weigh about 180 pounds. So I would say at least 150 grams of protein. And you want to, although it may not be as important, but you want to split it up throughout several meals a day. And of course, different proteins of different qualities. That number would probably be lower if all your protein sources were from meat, eggs, and dairy, which is your best sources, or it might be a little higher if you were getting it from things like lentils or other vegetables and vegetable sources, which are not as high a quality. Most people are going to get a combination of all of these. Once you've got caloric deficit and you're getting adequate protein, then that brings in carbohydrates and it brings in fat. You do have, in protein, we talk about essential amino acids, which is why I mentioned earlier that animal sources tend to be better because they contain all the essential amino acids. But if you combine them, you can get them other ways. And you have something called essential fatty acids as well, which means there are certain fats that you do need to have. Carbohydrates, there are no essential carbohydrates, but many carbohydrate foods tend to have a lot of vitamins and minerals. So for me, and I stand to be corrected on this, but once you've got adequate protein, you're creating a caloric deficit, I don't really care. I wouldn't eliminate either of the other ones, although I know of a lot of anecdotal evidence about people on carnivore diets who eat no carbs who seem to do quite well. But my thought is, and also from a lifestyle perspective, that's certainly not for everyone, not for me anyways. But once you've got adequate protein, fill up the rest of your calories to get a caloric deficit with a combination of good healthy fats and carbohydrates. And I don't care really what proportion of one or the other that you do, as long as the total calories winds up being caloric deficit. So how much the caloric deficit? Depends on the person. I think a good starting point for somebody is somewhat below 2,000 calories. You don't want to go too low, and then just sort of think about measuring and measuring in some way, shape, or form what you're eating, whether it's because you're just using, the method of using a plate and thinking 1 palm-sized piece of protein every time, fill the rest of your plate, have 3 meals a day like that with a couple of snacks, or whether you're using an app like Chronometer or FitnessPal or Lose It, and you're writing down and measuring all that you eat. There has to be some sort of tracking that takes place. At the end of the day, get adequate protein, create the caloric deficit, start at 1,900 calories, and you find you're not losing, and give it some time, or that you're then think about adjusting. Remember, if you go too low, you could also not lose because your body can go into starvation mode. So you want to create the caloric deficit, eat, some people swear by intermittent fasting, other people swear by eating several small meals a day. I think there's arguments to make on both sides of it, whatever works for you, whatever fits your lifestyle. But I think as long as there's a caloric deficit, you got adequate protein, and the caloric deficit it exists, but it's not too much, because if you have too much, it's not good, and it's also not sustainable. So that's the fat loss part of it. I would be surprised if the advice that this gentleman received from his dietitian was a whole lot different from that. So, so the other thing was to get body fat to under 20%. Well, I mean, that's one and the same. It's body composition. Now, we want to get stronger. Now, so what I will talk about as far as, so going back to the poundages you're using and getting stronger, when people first start strength training, the initial adaptations, I've become convinced, at first, in my opinion, are psychological. People are just getting used to working hard. And at first, what feels really hard, eventually they get their heads around and they can work a lot harder. So people can say, well, I'm stronger, and they feel stronger, but in many cases, they're just simply getting used to working harder. The second adaptation is neurological, which is your body, your brain just gets better at sending the signals to your muscles, particularly when you're doing the same exercise, you're getting better. So some people would say that's skill acquisition. That's a part of it, but I think there's more to it than that. It's like you're building new neural pathways, and as a result of that, you can lift more weight easier. So at this point, you are quote unquote stronger in the sense that you can measure that you're lifting more weight, but you still haven't put on muscle mass. So not necessarily, because putting on muscle mass is, from your body's point of view, an adaptation of last resort, because it's expensive. Creating new lean tissue requires resources, and your body is always seeking to conserve energy and conserve resources. That's the way we're programmed from an evolution perspective. In order to survive famines, we always look to conserve energy. So it's only going to put on muscle mass if it really has to, and it's going to do it after any psychological and neurological adaptations have taken place. And some people are neurologically more efficient, and it depends who you are, because if you were, for example, a power lifter or an Olympic lifter or a martial artist who was competing in weight classes, they would want to get stronger without putting on muscle mass, because putting on a lot of muscle mass will actually work against them if they now have to compete in a higher weight class. So this is also a good time to mention the role of genetics. And the fact is that genetics will, to answer the original question, what can I expect in terms of results, is there are, in exercise, there's a bell curve of how people respond to exercise. So you have what's called, I may use the term wrong, but really easy responders where, even just a little bit of exercise and they will get very strong, very fast, and put on actual muscle mass. And you have people that are average. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are rare, but some people who actually will go backwards as a result of exercise. You have non-responders and you have negative responders. And it's hard to predict that in advance. So this gentleman, to me, shows that he's already pretty strong. And nature is kind of cruel a little bit, is that, there's a saying, to those who have many, much will be given. To those who have little, little will be given. Technically, most people who are naturally strong also tend to make better progress when they do strength training, and people who are not often will still improve, but not make the same progress. That's why often there's a selection bias that goes on in the gym, because you're seeing a lot of big, strong people in public gyms, and you assume that it's because of what they're doing. And while that is obviously a factor, what is not taken into consideration is when people tend to get stronger and gain muscle easier, they are more attracted to that type of sport, whereas people, or that type of activity, I should say, whereas people who are less so will get discouraged and not engage in it as much, and might wind up with jogging or some other activity where they feel they're getting more results by maybe improving their time in a run or a bicycle ride or things like that. So Arthur Jones, the founder and inventor of Nautilus, used to talk about body types, and he talked about ectomorph, the person who is so-called tall, skinny, doesn't put on muscle mass. Well, and then you can have a mesomorph, which is the person who is sort of shorter limbs and puts on muscle easily. And he used to say, a pure mesomorph will probably look like he lifts weights, even if he's never touched a weight. And a pure ectomorph might look like he's never lifted weights, even though if he's been doing it for 20 or 30 years. So genetics plays a huge part. The other thing, going back to diet, is if you are not consuming adequate protein, putting on actual muscle mass will be more difficult. You do need the building blocks for protein. Once you've got adequate protein with a good cushion for a little extra, eating more probably won't make any difference whatsoever, because your body just won't be able to use it anyways. But having less, again, will make a difference. So you want to be able to eat subsequent protein. Now, other than genetics, the other thing, to answer the question, sounding like a politician here, it depends, is what are you doing in between workouts? And also how much, because when somebody asks how many results can I get, or what are the results I can expect from your program? Well, they're asking about, based on the quality of the stimulus they will receive during the workout, what can I expect as results? But the fact is that the stimulus is only one part of the equation. What you do in between, because if somebody has a great stimulus and comes back and has poor sleep, is maybe engaged in a lot of other physical activity, either playing a sport or a physically demanding job, maybe they're doing other exercise over and above what they're doing here because they haven't got their heads around the fact that once or twice a week is enough. So they're doing other things. And as a result, they're cutting into their recovery ability and they're not fully recovering from their workouts. As opposed to if you had all those things dialed in well, great sleep, great fresh air, minimizing other stresses in your life, which could be marital stress, could be financial stress, could be work deadlines, all those things. If you get all those dialed in perfectly, then you're going to get much better results. Having said that, one of the things is that most programs have shown, regardless of what the stimulus is, regardless of what type of things you're doing, that most of the gains will happen in the first 6 months, and then after that, to 6 to 18 months. And then after that, after 18 months, gains for most people become very incremental. In other words, the idea that you sometimes hear about if people have been working out for years and years, unless they've really been, not doing it properly at all, not, really stimulating any growth, but they already have, um, had a noticeable results and they're in great shape from working out for years and years, suddenly changing to some new program and then putting on 10 pounds of muscle as a result of doing a better program, unless these people either have not been working hard enough and haven't created the stimulus to get it, or if they're severely overtrained and then take a good break to give their body a chance to recover and then start in a more sensible program, the idea that you will suddenly gain 10 pounds of muscle over some new magic program is a nice thought, but is not realistic for most people. Most results come in the first 6 to 18 months. Again, how much muscle can somebody put on? Again, without genetics, recovery ability is what makes a big difference. And of course, sticking with the program long term, because the other part is what can I get in the first 10 weeks is a valid question. But at the end of the day, is let's say you did have an optimal program that you stuck with for 10 weeks and got great results. If that optimal program is not sustainable over the long term, I would suggest it doesn't really matter because those results will soon be history and you're going to go back to wherever you were. So you want to be sustainable over time and get results throughout. Now, I'm just going to go through some of the other questions here. So sometimes also people talk about the brain benefits of exercise, and sometimes people will talk about depression, sort of being in a fog, things like that. Feeling like as a result of not feeling really good, they might, have one or two extra drinks than they might otherwise have, things like that. So, and of course, I'm a non-drinker. I'm not a holier than thou telling anybody that they shouldn't drink. But I do think that alcohol is something that should be kept to a minimum. It's certainly not a health food by any stretch of the imagination, but of course it may have some other things. So going back to diet for a second and achieving caloric deficits, I'm going to backtrack a bit here, is if you are dieting, and I talked about, remember, caloric deficit, getting adequate protein and getting the difference with either fat, carbs, or a combination of the two. Another thing I would point out in a PE diet, which stands for a PE ratio, which was written by Dr. Ted Neiman, makes some good points about certain things. So PE refers to protein versus energy. So Dr. Neiman talks about that either fat or carbs are fuel primarily. The main thing they do is they provide fuel for us to, burn energy like gas for the car, whereas protein is building blocks. So you need building blocks in your body because picture that there's a brick wall, and at one end of the brick wall, there's a guy taking away bricks, and at the other end, there's somebody putting on bricks. Well, all the cells in your body, different cells at different periods of time, are dying and then being reproduced again. And so it's like that brick wall. And in order for cells, whether it's muscle mass that you're trying to put on, or just, your bones, everything, every cell in your body is dying and regenerating at different times, you need protein. And fat and carbs can't do that. Only protein can help build new tissue, whatever it is, lean tissue. The other ones the only tissue they build after fuel is fat tissue or glycogen, because they are simply energy. So his point of view is that we should have a ratio of protein to energy. He suggests at least 50% should be protein. I think there's some debate as to what the ratio would be, but one of the points he makes in his book that I think is definitely valid is he points out that foods that contain carbs and protein together in the absence of protein. So think snack foods, think virtually all baked goods are foods that are almost impossible not to overeat. Whereas if you add foods that are primarily protein and or high in fiber, and that may or may not have those other things. If they're primarily protein, they tend to have much more satiety value. They keep you full. It's almost impossible to overeat those kind of foods, whereas the other ones you should, it's almost impossible not to overeat. So I went on that tangent when I was talking about alcohol, because alcohol certainly falls into, even though alcohol is its own macronutrient, you basically have protein, fat, carbs, and alcohol. Protein has 4 calories per gram, fat has 9 calories per gram, carbohydrates has 4 calories per gram, and alcohol has 7 calories per gram. And some would argue that alcohol is just really refined, distilled, as it were, carbohydrates. So when you're the way you should treat foods like baking and snack foods and things, in my opinion, is the same way you should treat alcohol. In other words, they should be occasional treats that you should be very careful with. So just as you can become addicted to alcohol, you can become addicted to those foods, and they will make it different. Because if you're trying to achieve a caloric deficit, one of the things that helps is not feeling hungry all the time. So, foods that make your insulin spike and then come down tend to leave you hungry. Now, as far as more and more the benefits of exercise, so going back to results, have been shown that getting stronger and getting more muscle mass, while being really great benefits, may be not necessarily the best benefits of it, because it does help with mood. It's been shown with cognitive. It's been associated with people getting less Alzheimer's, all these different things. Now, I look at all these studies, by the way, and I want to do a bit of a disclaimer. There's a lot of these studies that claim various health benefits for exercise, nutrition, whatever it is. I always think, all right, that's good, better than obviously being associated with bad things. But I always say, be careful to jump to completely conclusive cause and effect type of things, because that can be, are people healthy because they exercise, or the healthy people tend to exercise more? Are people who are less likely to wind up with Alzheimer's more prone to exercise, or is it the other way around? And I think that's sort of something that you have to take into consideration. So, that's basically what do I think somebody can achieve? Again, we have to get on a body composition scale. I do think a young person, this person is not 40 yet, probably still got good testosterone. Self-employed business person, who tend to be in some cases the type of people who have higher testosterone. Could they put on 5 or 10 pounds of muscle with proper diet, proper nutrition, proper rest, sleep, and recovery, and managing those things well? I think that's absolutely possible. Whether it happens or not is, it depends. I know it sounds like a politician, but it is what it is. And then the other side of it is, as far as the poundages and how much more you lift, then definitely I can see in 10 weeks that will improve anywhere from 50% to possibly as much as 150% in various exercises. Again, take into account some of that's going to be psychological, neurological, and some of it's going to be actual strength. And while it's good to look at those results, I always come back to Ken Hutchins and the real objective of exercise versus the actual objective. Yes, as we get stronger, we should lift more weights, more time, but we have to be careful that if that's too much of the focus, that behaviors can creep in where we use momentum, poor form, and various things in order to reach that goal, as opposed to if you're getting really good at your form. I know one gentleman who, seeing his face, I can't remember his name, has told me that he's put on, and this is somebody who's been training for a long time, has put on 10 pounds of muscle in the last 10 years. And this person's in his 50s. Doesn't sound like much, but in your 50s, when you should be losing muscle, if you're actually gaining. But this person told me that he has not increased the weight on any of the machines. he does on purpose. He just continually works on getting better and better and better form and reaching deep inroad, meaning fatiguing the muscles efficiently, safely, using the same weight, and he's putting on muscle mass. So it's hard to measure, right? So I know this is a really long-winded answer to this person, but I do think that, well, I think it's good information because it's what I believe, or, well, I continue to believe until I'm presented with evidence to the contrary that's compelling enough. But this is what makes the most sense to me at this point in time. So that's essentially, I tried to put a number on it, 5 to 10 pounds of muscle and increasing the amount you're lifting by 50, 100, 150%. Other things would be feeling better, feeling like you have more energy, feeling like your day-to-day activities work well, improved sleep, all these things. So anyways, all for now. And thank you for listening, and really appreciate anybody who takes the time to subscribe and share this. Bye for now.